He's not a household name, but the resignation of Shumit Banerjee from the BBC board today is not a mere administrative footnote. It's another fracture line in a corporation that looks structurally fragile, internally divided and externally besieged. Banerjee's letter, with its pointed complaint that he was not consulted before the departures of Tim Davie and Deborah Turnus, reads like an indictment of the BBC's current governance culture. It signals not only his disapproval, but his belief that the board itself is no longer functioning as a coherent, responsible collective charged with stewarding the public broadcaster. Banerjee's brief tenure was due to end in December anyway, and many will try to dismiss this as routine timing, but the content of his resignation makes that impossible. A non-executive director, formally tasked with protecting the independence of the corporation and ensuring the board acts in the public interest, has chosen to leave while explicitly claiming that the basic processes of oversight have broken down. That should alarm anyone who understands how fragile institutions become when their own guardians feel shut out. This rupture is occurring against the backdrop of a broader collapse of confidence. The Panorama scandal, already serious in itself, has morphed like a cancer into a full-scale crisis of editorial credibility. The edit that misrepresented Donald Trump's speech before the Capitol riots was not simply a technical lapse. It has become the fulcrum on which critics claim to have found proof of systemic bias or even deliberate manipulation. The fact that the US Federal Communications Commission is now involved, investigating whether the broadcaster misled American audiences, adds a further international dimension that the BBC can ill afford. The resignations of Davie and Turnus were an attempt at crisis management, but they have instead confirmed the sense of an organisation whose leadership has lost its grip. Banerjee's complaint that he was excluded from that decision-making process places the blame squarely on the chair, Samir Shah, and on the senior non-executives such as Robbie Gibb and Caroline Thompson, who will be grilled by the Culture, Media and Sport Committee on Monday. They now walk into that hearing with the stench of disarray hanging over them. The BBC is not only under attack from the American president, who is openly threatening a billion-dollar lawsuit and demanding accountability, it is also under attack at home. Conservative MPs, Reform UK figures, GB News commentators are gleefully declaring the corporation finished. Even among its supporters, the mood has hardened from concern to disbelief. Licence fee evasion is surging, public trust is ebbing away, the BBC's repeated apologies no longer satisfy either its critics or its friends. In short, the BBC is being hit from both directions. The external pressures are loud, organised and politically advantageous for the corporation's opponents. But the internal pressures are more dangerous still. Governance failures, internal leaks, factionalism in the newsroom and an evident breakdown in the command structure. When a board member resigns because the board itself will not share information with him, that is the classic symptom of an institution that has ceased to believe in its own processes. The broader question is how long this can continue. The BBC has historically survived its crises through a combination of moral authority, institutional mystique, and political restraint among its critics. Those advantages have evaporated. Moral authority has been damaged by editorial editors that carry the appearance of ideological slant. Institutional mystique has shrunk under the glare of modern media competition and endless internal scandal. And political restraint is dead, replaced by an era in which attacking the BBC is electorally useful, ideologically satisfying and increasingly normalised. The BBC cannot limp on. It requires radical, structural reform if it is to survive this storm. That means three things. First, the governance system that is transparent, accountable and insulated from political appointees whose own allegiances compromise the perception of neutrality needs to be established and maintained. The current board model is visibly failing. It needs new blood, and blood which is independent. Second, a new editorial culture that takes accuracy, context and impartiality seriously in a way that cannot be caricatured as defensive or evasive. The Panorama affair is not just a misedit, it is a breach of trust. Third, a funding model that recognises the changed media landscape. A broadcaster losing £1 billion a year through licence fee cancellations cannot pretend the old settlement is sustainable. In many ways, Banerjee's resignation crystallises what has been quietly evident for months. The BBC is experiencing not a single scandal, but a systemic breakdown. The internal cohesion, the external reputation, the financial and political foundations, all seem to be shaking at once. The question now is not whether the BBC can return to what it was. It cannot. The question is whether it can reinvent itself quickly enough to avoid collapsing under the combined weight of political hostility, public suspicion and scepticism, and its own internal dysfunction. The BBC has always presented itself as a great national institution that holds the country together. Now it's got to hold itself together. Today it looks more like an institution that cannot do that. It needs to. If it's to survive, it has to find the method, the structure to cohere, and unless something changes at the deepest level of the BBC, Shumeet Banerjee's resignation will not be remembered as the end of a chapter, but as the moment the spine of the corporation finally cracked under the strain.